All right, it is almost time for OTAs, minicamps, and I cannot believe we're barely out of the draft. And we're like, all right, it's almost time to start prepping for next season. So that being said, Frank, I know you've written on this for Yahoo, and there's been a lot of conversation about the top storylines, and we're going to go through some of them now. And I want to start with what I think has become a forgotten storyline over the course of the last month and a half, because to me, guys, one of the most significant things we're going to be really judgy about at the beginning of the year is what do the Minnesota Vikings look like? Like, I don't think there's going to be a ton of patience and grace for the beginning of whatever this season looks like for J.J. McCarthy, simply because they did win 14 games last year and they let the quarterback that helped them do that walk out the door. So, like, to me, Frank, when we start talking about top storylines, JJ, his health, the Vikings, like that stands at the mountaintop as one of the things we'll be focused on.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a strange situation where a team, like you said, a team went 14-3, and instead of just doing the NFL thing and, oh, we're just going to keep status quo, keep it going, they kind of did a U-turn. And they said, no, we have a different plan for this. And I'm going to make you a promise right now. I will not criticize the Vikings if this goes south, because I'm more into process than results. And now, look, early in the offseason, I said they should franchise Sam, figure it out. But once I saw their process, I was very impressed. Them saying, we trust J.J. McCarthy, 10th pick of the draft. We liked him enough to even trade up to draft him, 10th overall last year. We are going to ride that out. We're going to trust our judgment. We're going to build around him. I think they've done a fantastic job building up the team around him, putting him in an environment to succeed. You have to make decisions in life, and we can't just wait for the results to judge them. So I think our process was totally fine here. Yes, it's a gamble. There's no question about that. But I think the way they went about it, I'm not going to criticize them if it goes south. I really won't. I will say, I think the Vikings are doing the right thing here. They had a plan for this. Now, J.J. McCarthy could get hurt again, or just natural regression could happen to the Vikings. There's things that could happen. But I think what we're going to see what we have to see over the next 2 months is, first of all, is J.J. McCarthy healthy? Like, that was a question late last year. He had the second procedure and all that. If he's healthy, is he kind of ready to take this step into the starting role? I think the answer is yes. We saw that quarterback class last year do really, really well. And I'm making a promise. No matter if this goes really south for the Vikings, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I told you so. That was wrong. Nope. I like their process throughout this. I think the Vikings did the right thing. We'll see if the results follow.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to have questions about whether the Vikings defense is ready to contend. They've got such a great group of players. Andrew Van Ginkel just got another contract. We've got Brian Flores coordinating it, and just the way that his blitzes are. I mean, people fear what he does to their offenses when they get ready to play him. He is a problem on his own as a coach and as a play caller on defense. I think on offense, when you look at it, the Vikings saw that, okay, yeah, maybe Sam Darnold could have done a little bit more at the end of the season, but really this more came down to the offensive line. And we saw that they signed Gard Wilfries, they signed Ryan Kelly, they invested in other offensive line pieces, and they understood that no one was going to be able to have success with the offensive line that was constructed at the end of the season after some of the injuries that hit them. To me, what's interesting is J.J. McCarthy spoke to the media recently, and he did admit what I'd kind of been hearing for a while. It was kind of a not so subtle secret that he'd lost a lot of weight during his recovery process. And obviously I'm sensitive to talking about people's bodies and people's weight, but JJ pretty much admitted last week that he was down to the 180s and now he's back at 215. Now, I don't know if he was exactly at 215 beforehand, but he said this. I think he said high 180s was the words he used, but I mean, to lose 30 plus pounds, I get that people's metabolisms are different. And I understand that it was hard for him because he couldn't work out and he had the recovery, and I've got a fracture right now and it sucks not being able to work out in the way you want to. But like, I think when you look at this, you just have to ask yourself, okay, well, what is going to be the impact on his body this year? Even if he has a little bit more protection, how much do you have to worry about it? He said he was, quote, feeling 110%. And I do think there are benefits in the sense that he got to know his teammates. He got to know his play caller and Kevin O'Connell. He got to know the general playbook and vibe of the team in a way that we saw with Patrick Mahomes, for example. It really helped. But he really took a lot of time off physically. And I think we saw even, for example, Anthony Richardson last year. Some of it was on Anthony Richardson. Some of it was he couldn't spend the offseason throwing in the same way because he had a shoulder injury. And we've seen different players. Brock Purdy had some of this stuff when he had an elbow injury. It does take guys a little bit of time after they've not been able to throw or even work out for so long. And so I think that I don't think we should expect J.J. McCarthy to be playing at 110% by week one, even if he is feeling 110%.
Think about just the first time he takes a hit. You know, like there's just such a difference in no matter how much training he's done and then trying to put the weight back on. And, frankly, I've worked with a lot of guys over the span of my media career that played in the NFL. And it is wild to me. One of the things that I've always found interesting is talking, especially to linemen, about how difficult it is to keep weight on and how guys really have to just work. That's a full-time job to eat and work enough to keep the weight on that they need. So you think about the work that JJ's had to put in to put the weight back on. But then you also think it's just about how jarring it will be to his body the first time he takes a hit. And then on top of that, there is still an adjustment. Like, he looked good in the preseason. That's fine. There's an adjustment to regular season football in the season. Like, we have to acquiesce, I think, at this point, that JJ's, no matter what happened, no matter how many years he's been in the league, he's walking in sort of like a rookie, right? So, like, everything that happens week one is going to be so wildly different than it would be, just the fact that he is still, Frank, in so many ways, a rookie quarterback. There's going to be a learning curve. Like, it's hard to, and you're right, that, they've got a process. But we have heightened expectations for a team that won 14 games. We have heightened expectations for a coach that everybody's fallen in love with for good reason. And we have heightened expectation from seeing two rookie quarterbacks in back-to-back years absolutely dominate. Like, I hear you, but grace is not something often given out by fans. And so, like, I don't know how much grace everybody wants to give JJ and the Vikings in this situation, but there should be some.
If you think about Bryce Young, one of the reasons he had such a difficult rookie season was not only because of how he played, it was also because of how he played in contrast to CJ Stroud, who was drafted after him. And so it's not going to help out JJ McCarthy that Jaden Daniels had a great year last year. Bo Nix, who was drafted after him, had a great year last year. Michael Penix looks like he's got something. Caleb Williams had a skill set, even if he's not quite there yet. And Drake May played well. So, he is going to be judged relative to his class, whether or not the Vikings want that.
Yeah, and the rust factor is there, but I think one thing working for JJ is he's played a lot of high-level football. Like a lot of these guys you just talked about, Jori, the names of the rookies last year, what was one common thing they kind of had? They'd all played a lot of really big-time football in college. Jaden McCarthy played in a national championship game for Michigan. Like, I know that we like to think of the NFL as a different thing, and it is in many, many ways, but when you've played in a national championship game for Michigan, you're going to be ready mentally, at least for week one. I truly believe, and more like not entirely, but the bright lights aren't going to get to you as much as it would be for Trey Lance, who was playing at North Dakota State. No offense to North Dakota State, but I think that his transition process is going to be quicker. There's going to be a year of rust that never really helps a guy, but I don't know. I just trust that JJ McCarthy is going to be pretty good coming out of the gate, and I just think the Vikings had a plan for this, and they said, you know what, we're going to leverage this advantage we have with his rookie deal. We're going to build around him. So I think, but you're right, there's not going to be much grace. I think a lot of Vikings fans are going to be like, let's say they start 1-4. They play in a really, really tough division. So once the schedule release comes out, Fitz, we can tell them the start of the season.
I knew that was where you were going. I knew that's what you were going to do.
But if they're 1-4, then the Vikings fans are going to be like, oh, we screwed this up. JJ McCarthy stinks. I get that. That's how everybody's going to react. But I think the Vikings did the best they could this offseason with the information they had and said, we trust this guy. We trust our scouting. We trust our development. We trust that this rookie deal is going to be one of our biggest edges. We're going to ride this train.
The only pushback I have to a national championship, taking nothing away from JJ, is that let's acknowledge the fact that year, in his national championship year, he threw the ball 332 times, which, just for point of reference, is about 100 less than C.J. Stroud threw in his second to last year and about 60 less than he threw in his last year. Like, JJ did not throw Michigan to a national championship for the most part. Like, when we were talking about JJ being the draft pick, so many of us were saying, well, fine, Harbaugh tells us he's the quarterback of a generation, but, he didn't really show us that in college. That wasn't the way Michigan was built.
Well, Fitz, I'm glad you bring that up because, yes, I recognize that the Vikings have a scheme that allows Aaron Jones to do certain things, and Jordan Mason has played well for them at times, but this is a team that has fantastic receivers, and so you want a quarterback who's going to be able to take advantage of them. And, yes, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and all of those weapons are going to make a quarterback right at times, but he is going to need to throw more often and with a higher level than he did at Michigan.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We'll see how that plays forward for JJ, and all eyes will be on that. That's not the only quarterback interesting conversation we're going to have coming into OTAs and minicamps, though, because the Colts have a sneaky quarterback competition that could, this is the drama, Frank, that I love here, because, Anthony Richardson versus Daniel Jones, it feels like if if by some reason Daniel Jones wins this quarterback competition, then the conversation will be about the resurgence of Daniel Jones under this offense and what it means, and can Daniel Jones be that guy? And it will mean, in the eyes of many, I think, sort of the end of the Anthony Richardson experiment in the league. So it's wild to me that this isn't just about, hey, who wins this summer. The repercussions for this are pretty staggering when you think about the way that each of the players will be viewed on the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the next couple months start this. Like usually, OTAs, minicamps, whatever, it's a lot of noise and a lot of guys running around in shirts and shorts, and we make a big deal out of it when it's not. But I think in Indianapolis, they need to see some progress from Anthony Richardson right now. Signing Daniel Jones at a contract they did just seemed like, when you're a parent, and I could speak on this among us three, you have that kind of one last gasp of like, all right, I'm taking away this. I'm taking away all your car for the week or whatever. And I think that's
did that ever happen to you, Jori? I don't think Jori ever got in trouble. I don't think Jori's parents
Never
ever had to say one more,
no.
And we're taking Jori probably grounded her parents.
Jori ate her vegetables every night. I'm sure of that. Yes.
Okay, the two things I'll say is, one, we did have a rule at my household growing up that when we were in high school and we started to drive, if you didn't get 7 hours of sleep, you weren't allowed to drive to school the next day, because my mom was an attorney who litigated all of the car accident cases. And so she saw like everything that could go wrong when you weren't properly rested and properly alert. And so my sister would just not finish her homework, go to sleep, and drive to school. And I would stay up late doing my homework and not drive to school. And my mom and dad would have to drive us because I couldn't once my sister was out of the house. The other thing I'll say is that timeout when I was growing up meant that we got our books taken away. And we told our parents, we're like, do you know how many parents would kill for their kids to read like this? But they knew it was like the only effective way. So either we'd be sent to timeout or not, but book limits were what we were penalized with.
So I believe
Frank,
the Colts
sorry that
even nerdier than you thought.
I'm sorry that I just derailed your point, Frank, but it was worth it to hear the book punishment. Go ahead.
The Colts have taken Anthony Richardson books away, right? They've said, all right, this is it, kid. You got to
need to bring my parents on for an interview about this.
I would listen to an hour of that. I can't lie. But I just think that this is the last straw for Anthony Richardson. I know it's only his third year and he hasn't played much football, but when you bring in Daniel Jones like this, make a big show of this is going to be a competition. You're not doing it because you really think it's a competition. You're doing it because you want to see how Anthony Richardson reacts to this. You want to see if he gets better. And if he doesn't over these next couple of months, we go to training camp and we hear a lot of drum beats from the Indianapolis beat writers that like, Daniel Jones is outplaying him in OTAs. Well, then we know where this story's headed. I think the next couple months, even though it's shorts and shirts, I think it's huge for Anthony Richardson to just show some progress, to show that, all right, you're right. This is my wake-up call. I got to get better in this offense. I have to get more consistent because, man, when they bring in Daniel Jones, that is a sign that they're desperate at this point to get something out of you.
But that's also a desperation point for the organization. That's the one thing I would add to this.
Absolutely.
Is like, we keep talking about Chris Ballard getting Chris Ballard gets 3,722 years at his job without any real results. And then there is the conversation about Shane Steichen, even as a head coach. I don't know if this quarterback contest goes absolutely backwards and you end up with this year's equivalent of Gardner Minshew versus Aiden O'Connell. I don't know how people keep their jobs through that. So it feels to me like it's huge for the players, also huge for the organization, Jori.
Yes, and I think what keeps coming back to me is when I asked a former offensive coordinator how he would go about bringing this competition to life and how he would go about deciding, he talked about, and I've said this on the podcast, he's talked about, okay, you want to give them similar, not just the similar number of reps, but also similar reps in terms of the quality of the reps of, hey, if you're running these 5 plays with the first team on one day of OTAs, I want someone running the same 5 plays with the first team on the next day of OTAs. But then he said at the end of it, if it's really, really close, he would look to the leaders of the team, if not ask them directly, who do you trust more to go out there, go to battle with, so to say. And I think if it comes down to that, and if the talent and performance is close enough in OTAs and in training camp for it to be something that is a league vibe, I think that Anthony Richardson has lost the trust of a lot of people there. And Daniel Jones, by all account, when he was in New York, did have the trust of the locker room. I understand that he didn't always play in the way that you would want to and that his performance didn't always lead to that. But I do think that from a toughness standpoint, from a work ethic standpoint, from a responsibility standpoint, there would be no tapping out from Daniel Jones. And so to me, the question is, because Anthony Richardson ceiling for his talent is clearly so much higher. I want to know, will having a full offseason without the shoulder rehab and fully working on his mechanics, will that be enough to say, no, he actually is that much better than Daniel Jones and he realizes what they're going to do? But I mean, going back to you guys said you give the Vikings credit for the process on JJ McCarthy, whether or not it works. The Colts have taken a very different situation with Anthony Richardson, which is that they did bring in competition and they're not expressing confidence with the quarterback that they drafted top 5.
They also, just to give them a little bit of credit, like, this is not a situation where they put the kid out on an island and didn't bring in people he could watch and mentor through. Like, I'm just, Anthony Richardson has got, like, if you sit there and you look at step by step what the Colts have done, I think they've tried to do it the right way. It just hasn't worked. And so we'll see what happens for Daniel Jones, obviously, in that. Another interesting quarterback competition going into OTAs, and also because, frankly, you just got to work his name into every show. Shedeur versus Dillon Gabriel. But hear me out, all right? So this is all, we weren't together last week, and I keep thinking about this, Browns quarterback competition. And the one thing that, look, nobody cares who was drafted where once you're in, fine, all of these conversations. Dillon Gabriel was drafted by the Browns 2 rounds ahead of Shedeur. Like, doesn't that have to mean at some level that the Browns organization looked around and thought, you know what? If we're going to bring a quarterback in, the one that we know we can get right now is Dillon Gabriel. And I feel like there's just no conversation, Jori, that he even has a shot at this job. And, like, in my mind, if they did draft him in the 3rd round, no matter what happens with Shedeur, and everybody likes talking about Shedeur, like, Dillon Gabriel versus Shedeur in camp is interesting to me simply because the Browns told you that they think Dillon Gabriel's a better quarterback, 2 rounds better than they think Shedeur is at this point.
Well, I think that you have to look at the Shedeur Sanders conversation as a 2-tiered conversation, and that gets into Dillon Gabriel. So Dillon Gabriel has a higher floor because of the work ethic, because of the character, because of what he's done, but a lower ceiling than Shedeur Sanders, because Shedeur Sanders has proven to be more talented and, quite frankly, in a lot of ways more productive in college. Not in always, but in a lot of ways. But to me, when I think of how Shedeur fell so far, and we talked about this a little on the show last week, but I don't think we went into it in this depth, is that it was kind of is Shedeur a starter for your team? And if not, then what? Like, this is not just one continuous spectrum of this. So if you believed he was a starter, which again, most scouts I talked to kind of had him as an early 2nd round, if not late 1st round talent, or 2nd round talent who could get pushed up to the end of the 1st round just because of the supply and demand of quarterback, then you say if you trust that all of the off-field distractions are not going to overwhelm his talent, you draft him there. But once you get into backup territory, it's a different conversation because talent alone isn't going to do it. And you have to worry about the controversy in a different way because, as we talked about with the Justin Tucker conversation, people will put up with a different level of distraction and or off-field infraction if you are playing at a high level, starting at a high level, but once your performance dips off or once you're not the starter at your position, they don't want to deal with that. And so Shedeur Sanders actually had a different hill to climb once he went into the backup conversation. I think Dillon Gabriel probably has a better chance in 2025 of being a high-level backup than Shedeur for several reasons, but I think it's unlikely that he is going to be the starter in the next couple of years. And every time I say this, my dad's like, why not though? Like, why do you say he can't start? Like, stop putting a ceiling on him. But I think part of it is the height, and it's not even that the height can't do it. Like, clearly we've seen whether it's Drew Brees or Russell Wilson that guys can overcome the height, but is it what the Browns view as their ideal role for their system? I do think that both of them can have the system fit, but I kind of think about when the Saints drafted Spencer Rattler in the 5th round, and there was this idea of like Jake Hayner, I talked to Saints people who told me was more likely for them to be the backup. That was like a more consistent backup. He wasn't going to make some of the crazy decisions that Spencer Rattler would make. But if you want the spectacular plays and Spencer Rattler could figure out the decision making, he was more likely to have the starter ability over time. And so that's kind of how I view Shedeur Sanders versus Dillon Gabriel.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this. And over on the Yahoo Fantasy side, my good friend Scott Pianowski has a term he uses. Do you draft somebody proactively or reactively? And I think in this draft, the Browns drafted Dillon Gabriel proactively. When you draft a guy 90th, you are saying, we like you. We think we could do something with you. When you draft Shedeur in the 5th, I think that's reactive. Now, whether that's reactive to just he fell to the draft to the point where it's kind of value, the owner got involved, whatever. I don't think that they were proactively drafting Shedeur Sanders. It was more of this like, well, he's here, sure. I think they proactively drafted Dillon Gabriel, which tells you everything you need to know right now. And that whole thing you talked about, Fitz, of like, oh, it doesn't matter once it starts where you were drafted. That's a bunch of nonsense. Like, yes, guys like Tom Brady can erase a lot of the draft capital delta and all that kind of stuff. But that you're drafted where you're drafted for a reason. The same organization with the 90th pick, I believe it was, in the third round, had a decision to make. Do we draft Dillon Gabriel or draft another quarterback like Shedeur Sanders? They like Dillon Gabriel better, period. And that can change once you get guys into camp and all that kind of stuff.
Differently. I don't
differently,
think
but they did. Like, you got a choice to make. If they liked Shedeur Sanders more, they would have drafted Shedeur Sanders, right?
If it was a period, they wouldn't have taken another quarterback 2 rounds later if they liked him that much.
Fair, but I just
comma, not period.
I think that when you're building a depth chart, Dillon Gabriel's got to be ahead of Shedeur Sanders to start this thing. That can change competition and all. But right now, yes, Dillon Gabriel's set up pretty well. If Shedeur Sanders didn't exist, we'd be talking to about Dillon Gabriel in a whole different light, saying, why can't he beat Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett? He was a 90th top 100 pick. He's got the draft capital that they pretty clearly liked him enough. Like, why can't he beat these guys and win a starting job?
I mean, to me, certainly when they're on the clock in the third round and they decide to take Dillon Gabriel, they're telling the rest of the league, hey, we're good if you take Shedeur. And then in the fourth round, when they don't take him, it's like, hey, we're good if you take Shedeur. Like, there's plenty of, like, that's it's all going to be a moot point once we get into the competition. And I'm not sure history will remember, by the time we get to September, people are going to stop putting numbers next to their names in the sense of the way fans view it. But Frank, I do think you're right. Like, as we stand, I just think that we've slept on the fact that Dillon Gabriel was a third round draft pick, which feels high to draft a backup quarterback and low to draft a starter, but that's just where he is. So, maybe he can take away some reps.
Last thing I was going to say is we should really be paying attention this week to Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel in rookie minicamp, because one of the biggest challenges after rookie minicamp is how are you going to have enough snaps for these guys? And so to have 2 quarterbacks to share the bulk of the important snaps with is going to be really interesting before they get into the Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco mix later in OTAs and minicamp with the veterans.
Roster construction also going to matter to the Browns as you say that, because they're not going to carry 4 quarterbacks.
I think they will. We talked about that a little bit last week. Like, why not?
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine carrying a 4th quarterback as a developmental guy. It's a 53rd spot in the roster. Like, NFL teams overthink this too much.
I've had a GM tell me that he thought backup quarterback was the 11th most important spot on the roster. And now, obviously, there's 22 plus starters, special teams guys, add on after that. And this is not like, oh, there's 22, 25 guys, and this is the 26th most important. Like, not it's the most important backup. He thought it was the 11th most important role in the roster. So I do think backup quarterback is just given a different premium.
I think backup quarterback's given a different, but like, I mean, my God, the league was trying to look at the rules to figure out if they were going to add an emergency quarterback that didn't count against the 53, because they don't want, it's hard to figure out how to carry enough quarterbacks. There are teams that don't like carrying 3, so they want an extra roster spot to couch their third in a way that doesn't count against the 53. Like, that's been a conversation in the last couple of years. How do we get from a backup quarterback to 4 quarterbacks right now? Like, there's somebody's getting cut out of it. Like, it would be hard for me to imagine that they're going to be willing to be thin at another position to carry 4 quarterbacks. That's just that seems like a staggering number to me. But maybe you're right. What about Travis Hunter? Now that we know where Travis Hunter's going, and now that we know that the Jags have this big fancy story and all these ticket sales that we talked about, what about Travis Hunter now? Like, where do you feel like the Travis Hunter usage? Because Jori, you've been really smart and passionate about the fact that it's difficult to play 2 different positions because of the time that it takes to develop in these. And now you're in an organization that has a lot of new this year. Like, how do you feel about Travis Hunter as we stand now, and the thought of Travis Hunter playing both ways? Like, what's Jacksonville going to do?
Yeah, I think even when they drafted Travis Hunter, the Jacksonville Jaguars said, hey, he's going to be primarily receiver at first, but we'll give him some options on defense. And I think that this week in rookie minicamp is going to be the first time we have a chance to see that. Of, does he only get receiver snaps? Does he get defensive back snaps also? It'll be fascinating because on one hand, you can't be in 2 places at once, or if he can, I hope he tells me how, because I would love to be able to figure that out. But assuming he doesn't figure out that space-time continuum problem, then there is going to be an issue if he can't be working with both groups at the same time. But from just a pure fitness standpoint, he could be playing both of them. Like, you're not into the game planning element at this time of the year that you will be in September. That will complicate this. And so to me, it's, if the meetings aren't at the same time, does he go to both meeting rooms? If there is a time where, hey, let's see all the receivers go. The problem is that usually if you were like receiver and offensive line, fine. Sometimes the line is going at a different time than the one-on-ones, but receivers and DBs are usually going against each other in one-on-one drills. So it does get a little complicated. But I think we will see both through words and actions this week a little bit of a glimpse into what Travis Hunter is going to do this year.
Yeah, and I think the next couple months are big because you could try things out. And also, I don't think Jacksonville can absolutely know what to expect until you get Travis Hunter in the building. You could see how much he can absorb mentally from the playbook right away. Because obviously, the next couple months are tough for rookies. You're getting everything thrown at you. You're expected to know this by the time camp starts. But I think at least, again, I'm very optimistic about Travis Hunter and this whole experiment. I think they're going to get him in the building and say, this kid's just different. So let's push it a little bit. Let's see. He's willing to put in the work after hours to make up for, like you said, not being able to be in two places at one time. I think that's how this is going to go. And I think Liam Cohen has been very smart about this. He said, we do have a plan for this. We thought about this. We have a plan. We're going to implement this. And I think over the next couple months, they're going to try some things out and see how hard can we push this kid. You don't trade up, give up what they traded up to get to number 2. And just think, he's just going to be a receiver this year. Nah, you're going to full Monty at that point. Like, you've given up so much that you have a serious plan for him playing offense and defense. But I think you have to implement it in the next couple months so you can get to camp and say, you know what, we know now that we've been with Travis, we understand what he can handle. We understand team-wise what we can do practice-wise, because this is a unique situation. We all know that. There's no playbook for this really in the NFL. So I think once you get to training camp, Liam Cohen will say, here's our plan for Travis Hunter, how we're going to practice him, how we're going to have him in meetings, how we're going to utilize him, all this kind of stuff. That takes shape over the next couple months.
But I think we have to remember that every decision with Travis Hunter is really not a decision primarily about Travis Hunter. It's how can we make Trevor Lawrence work? Because Liam Cohen, his success, and James Gladstone as general manager, they will be judged on whether or not they can resurrect what was considered a generational talent expectation for Trevor Lawrence. And as we talked about, as crazy as the draft capital was that they gave up for Travis Hunter, if they can get Trevor Lawrence to the level he was hoped to be playing at, then all of this will be worth it. But if they can't, it'll be, why'd you give up a first and a second and more to get this guy?
Yeah, it's the media availability time of OTAs and minicamps are going to be wild in Jacksonville because everybody's going to be sitting there with binoculars trying to figure out exactly what's going on both sides of the field.